Okay, so what we're up to is responding to Jesus. We're looking particularly at chapters 6, the last bit of chapter 6 through to chapter 8, and it's this final section before we've talked about an event in the middle of Mark's Gospel, which is your kind of big turning point, and that's where Jesus says to Peter, "Who do you say I am?" And from there, we've got the second half of the Gospel focusing on what does it mean to be the Christ. But at this stage, we're not there yet, and we're still trying to work out who Jesus is. And we get to see a range of responses to Jesus. So that's the focus of our time. But before we go into that, I just want to go back. It's the second section of Jesus Cares for the Perishing. So let's say that. This was the homework given you last week, and the focus that I want to give you, just for discussion about that, is just, did you have any comments, questions or reflections that proceed from your work during the week? Roy's already mentioned that he's read the New Bible Dictionary article on Gentiles and tried to answer the question. There was a question in the notes. Use these references to write an account in your own words of God's purposes for the Gentiles. Did anybody else have a struggle with that exercise?
I didn't do that one, but I have another question.
Okay. So, Roy, people might have that question next week. They might agree with you. Yeah. Penny. So, Penny, what's your?
So I was just so right at the very start, the purpose of studying this is to understand the contents, the meaning and significance of Mark's Gospel, and then so I like to know what the outcome's going to be as well, just from a study point of view, and to convey techniques and methods which a Bible reader should use, not only for reading Mark's Gospel, but for all other Gospels and ultimately the whole Bible. So that's kind of what we're doing here, is looking at reading it and then looking at how do we interpret that as a kind of a rule as well.
Right.
And so last week in particular, see, I've had two different ways presented to me in the past of looking at the Jesus calming the storm.
Okay.
And in Sunday school, end of last year and this year, we did that area, and we were talking about, particularly beginning of this year, talking about who Jesus was and how he was presented in that series of brief miracles. And that was in Sunday school, and what we were really trying to tell the children, according to the teaching, was that this is showing who Jesus is. This is showing his character. He is God. This is showing us that Jesus is God. So please, as a teacher, do not talk about the storms in your own life, because that is muddying the waters as to what we're trying to be teaching the children, because then they will go away looking at how to interpret the Bible. So this is the Sunday school teachers earlier this year.
Okay.
And then last week we talked about the storms in our life, and see, the thing is that I've grown up in church culture. I know these guys from when I was a little kid, and so for me, I've heard sermons where that's actually been how they've preached on that passage. So it's not a new concept to me, and that was fine. But I remember really thinking about it earlier this year. What is Mark trying to say in this area, and what's the point of this course we're doing is to learn how to interpret. Outcome 2 is exactly that. How do you interpret the Bible properly?
Right, sure.
And I thought that Rachel's notes on that at the beginning of this year was really good, and it really made me think, what are my preconceived ideas? And then when we asked, I understand why we were asking that question, and I didn't have an issue with it, but it's really made me think about preconceived ideas that center on ourselves, but what is the best way to interpret the Bible?
Mm.
And so that's where I'm going to come at the next few units is, what is this really saying rather than what I learned in the last 20 years? Because I'm not worried about heart versus mind. I want to know how to do this better. I don't think they're diametrically opposed.
Okay.
So the core reason you might look at the storms in your life is because maybe you haven't been personally impacted by that story of who Jesus is. Maybe.
Yes.
I don't know.
Is that allegorising you were talking about? Is that allegorising the parable?
Yeah. And we talked about it a couple of
Yeah.
weeks before when you gave the lesson on not falling into that trap as well. And I thought that was really interesting because it's so easy for us to be so central. But I really want to learn Mark in the way that it's supposed to be learned and not in an individual 20th century way.
Mm.
And so I think that was a challenge for us because there were a couple of questions we could have used as allegories as well, and that is not how we're to read Mark. So then I've been looking at that this week instead and reading other commentaries and having a look at, is it a trap or is it okay?
So I'll give you a few comments in response. I'll take that largely as a comment, all right? To some extent what you're saying, in terms of how to teach the material, David and Rachel might have a conversation between the different, to test.
Those questions weren't in the syllabus.
They're in the syllabus, yeah. So, at the first page of this set of notes, there's a question: what makes the Christian gospel hard to accept amongst people of your own generation? Okay. Now, I read that question, and often when you get taught to prepare a Bible study, they want to get the mind engaged, they want to show how it's relevant to your life or something like that, and they'll put a question like that in at the front. And I read that and I go, oh, is that really what the passage is about? You're already setting up my mind to think a particular way, and I'm not sure that I agree with you, that is the right question to be reading right at the start anyway. We do want to apply it to ourselves. We do want to engage with our thinking where it's at. And ultimately, in terms of a practical application, if Jesus is sovereign, there is a heart issue that we want to address, that we're going to benefit from that by thinking through Jesus' sovereignty when we're in storms of our own life. Okay, so there is a benefit to thinking that way. What I've been taught about how to read the Bible, and I think part of what they're getting at in that first section is, the first thing to do is read it in its own context. So what does a passage mean in the context of the chapter, in the context of the time, the geography, the culture? And as a Bible study leader, I'm always trying to teach people not to read themselves into the passage. It is very easy to read yourself into the passage. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a storm in your life, right, like you're searching for work, this is my situation, right? And when I'm asked, what's the storm in your life? It's really easy to make that the most prominent thing in my reading of the Bible. I think the study of the Bible, you need to try not to do that, and I'm not disputing the usefulness of that, but what I'm saying is to try. You firstly need to read it in its own context. The second thing you need to do is to put it in the context of the whole message of the Bible. That is, from the beginning to end, God's been working to save us through sending Jesus. So another conversation from my Bible study, we were looking at the passage that's being discussed this week. This is about, you are a light to the world, you are the salt of the earth. So for me, the question's going to be, who is you? And we looked at the passage, and Jesus was talking distinctly to his disciples when he said those things. And so we were talking in our Bible study, we were asking the question, is it you as created by God? Is it you as an Israelite? Or is it you as a disciple of Jesus right now? So these kinds of questions, right? The first question we're asking is, what's the context? The context was he's talking to the disciples. The second question we're asking is, well, where does this fit into the whole of the story, the Old Testament? All right? And so when you read the Beatitudes, which we've done at church recently, reading those in the light of them being people who were formerly in exile, now back in the land, waiting for the Messiah, okay? Those who are longing for the kingdom are people who are longing for the promises of the prophets to be fulfilled. So that's the second stage, right? First stage, context, immediate context. Second stage, in context of the whole message of what God is teaching. And then you're going to get to an application, well, like how does it relate to me? Okay? Whereas if I read...
That can be the part that can be then misinterpreted though.
Oh, and it's tricky because...
That's what I struggle with, because surely the main application is understanding learning more and more about the God who saved you.
Yep.
And that's what changes your heart.
Yep.
But there's a balancing act there. You can treat the Bible as a historical document, and you do not see how it's a living word.
Thank you, Lewis.
But how can you treat it as anything if you don't read it properly?
Well, that's right, and I think
That's what I struggle with is, okay, hang on a minute, how come we jumped there? Is that right, is it not? And then I turn myself inside out.
Yes.
That's what you talk to people.
Okay. So, someone report back to me. What do you think the disciples should have learned?
We were talking about how they should have at least realised he had some sort of control over things in nature.
Okay.
Then, afterwards when it was talking about take courage, don't be afraid, for they hadn't understood about the loaves
Okay.
yet. It's kind of implied.
Oh, you're going ahead.
No, not really. We're still in this bit.
I just looked at that and said, if they got it, then Mark wouldn't have had to make that comment first.
And he makes the comment several times in several different places they hadn't understood about the loaves yet.
All right. They hadn't understood about the loaves. It comes up later. That's part of the... I'm trying to set up the lesson.
It's not my fault. It was her.
Have you read Mark's Gospel before?
The evil spirits testified that he was the Son of God.
Right.
Beforehand.
That's
so
right.
if the evil spirits have testified to who he was, that's one thing they should have learned.
Yes.
And they've already experienced his power in the miracles before the storm, the power, and also the miracles of the healing, but also over demonic stuff, the spiritual stuff we should have recognised. And even the testimony of the spirits.
They constantly miss the point about who Jesus is.
Yes.
And I sometimes wonder if we talked about this morning actually, and sometimes the closer you get to in a Christian circle, a church, an organisation, being brought up as a Christian, we sometimes also miss the point of Jesus. And I also, I've said this before, I'm sometimes envious of people who've never been to Sunday school, never had the Bible read to them, and then come to Christ later in life.
Yes.
And I'm sometimes envious of the refreshing understanding they have of the newness of Christ and his whole sort of witnessing. And I also wonder if they too see him more quickly as the Son of God than a lot of people who are close in the church do. I think in many ways we're like the disciples.
Also, they had Jesus' baptism.
Yeah,
And
true.
the voice of God.
Yes.
Testifying as well. God's Spirit
Would they
speaking
do?
to God's Spirit saying that he is my son.
So Don's point, I think, forgive me, Don, but broadly speaking, it was not easy to accept
Exactly.
these things about Jesus. And if I reflect, because it was a bit of my reflection this morning as I was working on it. It seems to us easy to accept because we've already accepted, or we've been brought up in a Christian home, or we've been around Bible teaching for a long time. We might have forgotten. We might be presumptuous. And we know the whole story. We do know the whole story. We've got verse 1 of Mark's Gospel, which told us that he's the Christ, right? So we're reading it that way, but it was not easy. So I've said what kind of event would provide a suitable test of whether the disciples had learned this lesson.
Yeah, coming at the feast.
Like if it happens again. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. And just another bit of... No, we're going to skip this because I put it in the wrong place. All right. So what we're going to do now, because the main focus of today and the rest of the time is basically just to look at this passage and to reflect upon it, okay? So I'm going to start you reading, and after I've done 10 verses, someone else is going to step up. Thank you, everybody who contributed to the reading. Okay, so the aim of the exercise is to become quite familiar with the text. So it doesn't really matter whether you get it right or wrong. It's not like that. I've got some paper, and so if you go back into your groups, please. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement. That's excellent. Can I ask you to give perhaps... I'm just interested to hear what you've got for an overall plan or structure of this section. Perhaps I can ask you this question to start with. How would you summarise this section? Jack, I think you've been nominated, if that's okay.
I don't know how I'd summarise this section, but I know we were sort of looking at how, if you read the feeding of the 5,000 at the beginning of this passage, sort of the lead-in.
Yes.
And you have the feeding of the 5,000, then he goes on to talk about clean and unclean and the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, followed by the healing of the Syrophoenician woman and the deaf and mute man. Then the feeding of the 4,000, the use of the Pharisees, and another healing event.
Okay.
So it's sort of this repeated structure of feeding, then Pharisees, then healing.
Okay.
We're thinking about how that's sort of,
Do you want to talk about that?
it's almost like a positive example of this is what Jesus can do and what Jesus is, followed by these religious leaders have been leading you astray. I am the real example of what the Word of God looks like, of the fulfilled promises.
Okay, so I like that. What you've done at the end there, you've said an illustration of what Jesus can do, connected perhaps to who he is, followed by the response of the leaders, followed by... Sorry, what was the last one?
Followed by sort of Jesus acting as the fulfillment of...
Yeah, that's right, Jesus.
Yeah.
That's right. And in there's a warning about not that, not the Pharisees' response. You're going to need something new. Yeah. Okay. And we had it more than once.
Yeah, it's interesting. Looking at the structure, okay. First of all, it comes across, you look at that, Mark's a real storyteller.
Right.
Really great. And I don't know whether these events are chronologically accurate, I don't think that really matters. And he's put it between the two feedings, and that's really important. But you guys said something about the feeding, didn't you? The last second feeding.
Oh yeah. The first feeding was of Jewish people, and the second feeding was Gentiles.
Sure.
And therefore you see the structure sort of go. We're going from the known to the unknown.
Yep.
We're going from the people who know Christ, the disciples and the Pharisees, or the Jewish sort of group, the Pharisees. He puts in the conflict with the Pharisees, then he goes across and goes with the Gentiles. And then you've got the end up. Yeah. It's really interesting.
First for the Jews, then to the Gentiles, as it says in Romans. Yeah. You could ask a question or explore a question, how does he treat the Gentiles differently to the Jews? I'm not sure I'd come up with a really clear answer.
I can't.
Well, it's the same with the healing of the woman.
A good
She
answer.
talks about the dogs.
Yes, she does.
Because she was a Gentile.
Yes.
So, and he's showing, tongue in cheek, giving the bread to the dogs. So he's there for the Jews. He's showing all along. He's there for the Jews and the Gentiles all along.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And I mean, it's quite explicit that he's going into a Gentile region,
Yeah.
and that these things are taking place in a Gentile region. So he doesn't stop being himself, if you like.
And he talks about the Pharisees as well. It's not just about legalistic faith. He talks about here, there needs to be a heart faith, not a lip service faith.
Okay.
It's the changing of the heart. So to be careful of the unclean and the clean. What is clean and what is unclean. And it's not just by keeping the word of the Lord. It's about having faith in Christ.
You're right.
In who He is. So it's not just for the Jews, but it's for the Jews and the Gentiles.
Okay.
In the context of what it's here, because it goes from the Pharisees, and then it goes to the Jews, the Gentiles.
Yes, that's right. And Jesus, he's declaring all foods clean, effectively. Mark adds the comment. But it appears that even the Gentiles are going to become
Part of it.
clean.
And just because they have the law, the Jews and the Pharisees have the law, doesn't mean they're clean.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Don, looks like you wanted to say something.
Question. No. We got that. You put that down. I'm just Syria's to the north, and Syria's to the east, isn't it?
Syria's to the north.
And Tyre and he comes from Tyre and Sidon.
Lebanon.
So-
They're in Lebanon. They're
That's right, on the
they were
coast.
Phoenician towns.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember my ancient history. They're Phoenician towns, or before Phoenicia, the Canaanites. I mean, it's only I have read this gospel so many times. I'm only just getting my head around the geography of it all.
Right. Yeah, but the geography plays a part in the telling of the story, as you said. Yeah, okay. So, my summary of it is responses to Jesus, but, that's a little bit, it is simplistic, but you're showing a range of responses. The old religion, the representatives of the old religion are there, and they're always antagonistic and doubting. But there's the response of those who want to be healed. Is that a response of faith or not? It may just be a response of I'd like to be healed, but the Gentiles are willing to come as well as the Jews. But we've got the disciples, and we keep coming back to them and to their response or to their wrong response, and that seems to be particularly on view.
Well, that was some of the discussion we had, is that the overall plan of Jesus, or what I was reading, or we were reading, was that it's obviously demonstrating he's God. He's using subtlety with some of the historical references as well, like sitting up on a hill watching the disciples struggle in the boat and what have you, and then he passes by a bit later, and that's little references like that. It's what God had done with Moses, he'd done with Elijah.
Yes.
Passing by and that type of stuff.
Okay.
So there's some little nuances there that, and I feel sympathetic for the disciples because they don't get it and they probably think it's too quick. But they're on a steep learning curve, and I think you're right. There's this whole political, environmental, all this other stuff that's going on, and it's almost they're in overload because they can't comprehend what's actually going on here. But as I'm looking at it, I'm sort of thinking, well, he's been quite subtle here, and maybe it is. It takes a bit more to read into it because Jesus is really demonstrating who he is,
Mm-hmm.
and all the bigger picture stuff we can see, but it's that subtlety as well that occurs along the way.
Right.
I guess that was some of the plan, is that he does it in a grand scale, he does it in a very, probably say silent way as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the structure of the section is that he's in control of everything.
So I'm going to engage with what you've said about passing in a second, but in the second question, key issues or themes that Mark presents, I think I had the Gentiles as one issue, the sort of universal relevance. I had the distinction between a true shepherd and a false shepherd as another one.
Clean and the unclean.
Sorry, Roy, go that
Clean
again.
and the unclean.
Between the clean. Why would you say that?
Well, I think it's a key issue that's mentioned there, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, so what makes a person unclean? Yes, that's right. So I'm putting that in the category of the old religion and the new religion, because the old religion is teaching wrong way or ineffective way to be clean because they've misunderstood how a person's unclean. But yeah, you're right. And the third one I had was the identity of Jesus as something that's being worked out. All right, so let's just go through too far. So in that section, I mean, we're back at chapter 6, verses 45 now, and we've got the walking on the water, and it's following the feeding of the 5,000. And in the feeding of the 5,000, we've got a reference to wilderness, which is a kind of reminder of, or they're in a desolate place. It's a reminder of God having fed the people in the wilderness for 40 years. So if you were, there's no direct words that are telling you. It's just if you read the situation well, you'd be going, oh, I remember this has happened before. But then with the walking on the water, there's a couple of things in there which point to Jesus' identity again, and not merely as just the Christ. So at verse 50, immediately he spoke let's go back. Verse 48 to 50, I'll do it, chapter 6. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought that he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And it is very strange language. He was about to pass them by. Well, if you're going down to help them, why would you go around them? Why not just go straight to them? So it's quite an intriguing reference that's in there, deliberate, as Lewis points out. So, but it's not the only one. It's also the response that he's got at the end of verse 50, "It is I," which is also strange language. So these Old Testament references are directed from the notes, but I've printed them out because it's where I found it interesting to look at them. God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you." This is from the burning bush. This is the revelation of God's name to Moses. And he's using quite strange language there. And for those who have eyes to see it, and I haven't got the languages, but the language "it is I" is reminiscent of that passage. The notion of passing by, as Lewis told us, is also picked up in the Old Testament in these very poignant passages. So when Moses goes up the mountain and says, "Show me your character," to God, show me who you are. And God says that he's going to do it. He says, "My glory will pass by you," and he puts him in a crevice. I think he just sees him from behind. Is that right? Is my memory right? And he says, "When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by." So it's that language of passing by. And again, when it happens, "And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation." I just felt I couldn't quote that verse without having the whole bit of God's character in it. But it's that notion of passing by as a revelation of who he is in the midst of saving them from the judgments that they're under in the Exodus. And the other one was Elijah. Poor Elijah goes back to Mount Sinai to try and restart the people of God because there's so little faithfulness, and God says, no, there's 7,000 faithful. But in that context, the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. So this language that Mark uses is deliberately remnant of things that Yahweh, right, the God of the Old Testament, has done. So there's a kind of an intentional pointing to Jesus' person, identity, as the God of the Old Testament, doing the thing of the God of the Old Testament has done. But the disciples can't see that. There was even one from Job that they picked up on. So Job's talking about God in the midst of his suffering. He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. Treads on the waves of the sea. He is the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades and the constellations of the south. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. When he passes me, I cannot see him. When he goes by, I cannot perceive him. If he snatches away, who can stop him? Who can say to him, what are you doing? God does not restrain his anger. Even the cohorts of Rahab cowered at his feet. So there's the language again of God passing and treading on the waves of the sea. So all of these kind of allusions, if the disciples had eyes to see what and particularly and pick up on what they were experiencing, this is what they would have seen, the connection to God himself. And obviously they picked it up later, but not at the time. Okay? So where do we go from here? What I want you to do, if you've got your notes there, is just have a look with me. And I'm going to... So I've got these what I want you to do is look at a particular section which I had open and I've now lost. Okay, so page 89. Okay, so in the section under 3.1, it's commenting on the unbelieving generation. So remember, the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, please give us a sign, despite the fact that he's already been giving several signs. And Mark's summary indicates that there have been many signs and many people are coming for that reason. Now, in this text, let's just go from their attitude. Oh, they demand a sign, okay? About 2/3 of the way down the page. They demand a sign that would give them compelling proof that Jesus has heavenly approval. Jesus groans in despair. Their attitude to Jesus contrasts with the central message of Mark's Gospel. We have seen that the growing relationship between Jesus and his disciples and between Jesus and the suppliants, that's their word for people who come and ask for Jesus' help, has never been based on a proof. Rather, it is built on convictions that grow through their interactions with Jesus that have taken place in his ministry. And then they've got this summary point. Mark's narrative has made it abundantly clear that conviction about who Jesus is comes through faith. And this is based on a growing understanding of Jesus. Now, I'm not sure that I agree with the language in the notes at this point. But this is really coming to the heart of what we're talking about. So what I want you to consider is the relationship between experience, faith, understanding, and conviction. Okay, all of those words have come up in that little text. And all of those things are reflected in the Mark passage that you've been reading. Can you discuss that in your group? What I want to know is, does faith come from understanding? Does understanding come from faith? Does faith come from experience? Does faith inform conviction? Okay, this is what are the relationships? Ultimately, how do you come to the right response to Jesus?